Hello everyone and welcome to this complete Express.js and MongoDB course. In order to get started with this course, you're going to need to create a MongoDB Atlas account so you can access MongoDB, and you're going to also have to have Node.js installed on your machine. With that being said, if you do have any extra questions of stuff that I don't cover in this course, then please leave them down in the comment section below and I'll get back to you shortly. Thank you everyone and enjoy the course. So what we are going to build over the next hour or so is a simple backend API that connects to MongoDB that allows you to keep track of all of the projects that you want to create. I mean, if you have an idea that comes to you, you can simply tag the project, send it to your backend, and it will save to the database, and then when you're struggling for project inspiration, you can come back and view your projects and see them. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the video. So I'm over here inside of my command prompt now. You can just go ahead and do the equivalent on Mac or Linux if you're using that to follow along with this video. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder inside of which I will have my application. So in order to create a new folder in Windows, I can just type in mkdir and then followed by the name of the folder that I want to create. So I'll just call this Express App YouTube, and then I can change directory and in other words cd into Express App YouTube, and inside of this I can actually start to initialize my Node.js project. And in order to do that, I can just say npm init, and that's just going to initialize going to allow me to install all the packages that I need to make an Express application. So I can just type npm init, and you can actually do -y and it will answer all of these questions automatically, but for the moment we can just going to spam enter, and then we can just leave it blank and everything. This is just like some information about your application, but we don't need to fill it out with anything or really touch this for the moment. So once we've pressed enter on all of those and we've got like the template here for the package.json file that will be generated, we then need to install the packages that we are going to use inside of our application. And don't worry, I'm going to explain each and every one of them as we go through it. So the first one we're going to install is Express, and of course Express is just simply the library that's going to allow us to build our backend and simplify that whole process really. We'll talk more about it when it comes to it in a moment. The other package I'm going to install is .env, and for those of you who don't know, .env is simply just allows you to create a file inside of which you can put sensitive data, but when you push your code to GitHub, you don't post your env file to GitHub, and then you can keep your secret code safe. And the things that we'll be putting inside of our .env file are, for example, the connection string that we'll be using for connecting to MongoDB, which obviously, well, I say obviously, but maybe you don't know, it's going to have to contain a password so that we know so that MongoDB knows that our server can connect to it. And if it contains a password, well, it's very sensitive. So we want to install it, or put it, sorry, inside of a .env file. So again, more about that when we come to it in a moment. The other thing we want to install is called Mongoose. Mongoose is just a library that allows us to connect to MongoDB and interact with our MongoDB database in a much easier fashion. It gives us access to some really cool methods such as find by ID and delete, I believe is one of them. So we can just pass our ID to the Mongoose function or the Mongoose method that it gives us, and then delete something from our database just using the ID. We can also create new things for our database, update them, and do any kind of other interaction with the database in a much easier way thanks to Mongoose. Finally, the last package we need to install is called NodeMon. So NodeMon is a really cool package that helps your development process be much smoother and also much more just pleasing in general, to be honest with you. So essentially what NodeMon does is every time you save your file, it restarts your server. So basically it's automatically restarting the server every time you make a change to one of your files. The normal fashion is that whenever you make a change, the server will stop and you have to go ahead and manually restart it, which can take a lot of, it eats away at your time. And NodeMon just allows us to really cut down, so you just do Control-S on one of your files and it will restart the server and get it running for you again, which saves you a lot of time in the long run. So with that being said, now I've got all of my packages here that I'm going to install. I'm just going to press enter to install them. So obviously I've just skipped ahead after they've completed installing. It should take a few seconds for you depending on your internet and machine capabilities. Now obviously, well, I've got my I've got my package.json, I've got my packages installed. How do I get into VS Code? Well, there's one shortcut that you can do in Windows if you've got it set up, and you can just type in code space dot. Otherwise, you'll have to just navigate to the file, or rather the folder, sorry, and just open it from within VS Code by doing File and then open the folder here. So you can see here now I've got the node modules, and the node modules are just all of the things that we just installed, as well as all of the things that those packages depend on themselves. I've got my package.json here, which just contains all of the information about my project. The thing here you can see is this main one, which is called index.js, and this is essentially the entry point to your program. And I think even if I hover over it, actually, yeah, it says it's the primary entry point to the program. So all of our backend is going to start from index.js. So we'll go ahead and create that in a second. We've also got a script section here, which has a test one, which we won't be using, but we can just leave it there. You know, we can delete it if we wanted to as well. But you can see here, Copilot is suggesting to me I want to have nodemon index.js on start. And essentially what this is doing is it's saying whenever I type in npm start, I'm going to run nodemon index.js. And that nodemon index.js, again, going back to what I said earlier, is what allows you to just save the file and the server to keep running. And then down here we can see all of the packages that we installed, as well as the versions of those packages that we have installed. So let's just save our package.json file now, and we'll go ahead and create our index.js here. Okay, so as I was saying, this is going to be our entry point to the application. So at the moment, our server, like, we don't know how to connect to our server, and we don't even know where it's living, so to speak. And the way we identify where a server lives, so to speak, or how we can communicate with it, is by giving it a port number. Okay, so we say what port do we want to listen to, what port do we want to call, sorry, in order to communicate with this server. Well, we can define that inside of our application by saying const port equals and then the port number that we want to use. So I'm going to just tab here to let this comment, this suggest it here, and you can see we've got process.env.port, the 2 lines 3000. So this just means whatever's in process.env, which I'll explain in a second, or if that doesn't exist, then 3000. So this part here, this process.env.port, is going to refer to our env file in a second, and this will become relevant when we deploy the application to the actual internet and we have a port given to us, but we don't know what that port might be at the time of coding. But for local purposes, we just want to use 3000. So going back to this though, I mentioned it might be inside of env.port. Well, how does it know where env is? We haven't created that yet. So let's go ahead and create it now. So in order to do that, we can just go up here and type in .env, sorry, if I can type it correctly. And inside of our env file, again, is where we put all of our secret things. So at the moment, we don't have a port number to assign to it because we're not going to deploy it yet, and we don't know what it will be when it's on the live server. But we do know that it's going to be on 3000. But still, we're missing another step. This, even if we're not using anything secret right now in the env file, this index.js is still trying to read from it, but it can't read from it because it doesn't know how to get to the env file. So what we need to do is make our index.js file and all of our other files be able to read the env file. And in order to do that, we can just say require.env.config. And that means now that all of the things that are inside of our env file, which at the moment don't exist, can then be read inside of our index.js application. Okay, so we've got our port number here now. So we're defining a port, but you can see it's grayed out. It's not colored. So it means we aren't actually listening yet. Like our port wants to be on 3000, but it's not yet listening on 3000. So it can't accept any requests coming to the server that we're going to create. So in order to get that set up, there's a couple of things we have to do. The first one is to require Express. Because again, as I talked about, Express is what's going to allow us to make our server. No? So we need to bring it in to the index.js, and in order to do that, we can say const express equals require express. But again, we're still not quite there yet. We still need to actually listen for the port number. So we can make a new variable now called app, which is equal to the express function that we required being called. And whenever we want to interact with Express, we'll actually just use this app here, which is equal to the Express function being called. And this is going to give us lots of cool methods. Okay, you can see obviously it's not being used right now, but this app keyword here is how we're going to make routes. We're going to make our server listen for requests and all of that cool stuff. So let's just go ahead and type in app.listen. Okay, so we've got a method called listen, and this just means accept requests when they call on this port number. And we have to pass to the listen method a port. Well, we made the variable up in line 2 earlier, which is going to be equal to 3000 due to the fact that nothing exists at the moment inside of our env file. So after we've done that, we can say, okay, app.listen.port. Then we're going to have an arrow function or an anonymous function. And an anonymous function just means a function that doesn't have a name. And this function is going to be called after we have connected to the port. And it's just going to say server is running on port and then the port number. Okay? So it's listening, that much is true, but it's still not accepting any requests. It doesn't know what routes to listen on. And what is a route? A route just means an endpoint. And what does an endpoint mean? It just means a URL, so to speak, which the backend listens on. So when that URL, that specific URL is hit or interacted with from some other service, which we'll make in a second, it wants to run some specific code. And there are many different types of routes you can make. The main ones are get and post. A get route is just when you want to retrieve some information, and a post route is when you want to send some information to your server. So let's make a get route and try to get something from it. So I'm just going to say up here app, so we're going back to that app again, .get / okay? So at the moment, this is not finished yet, but this is just an example. App.get / just means whenever I go to localhost 3000 and make a get request, it's going to find this piece of code here and it's going to run some code. Well, what code is it going to run? Well, we can make it happen now. We can put a comma after we've got the thing we want to listen on, which is just the /, in other words, the base route, make another anonymous function, and we can see here we've got these parentheses. And inside of these parentheses, we can have access to two different things. They are called rec and res. They don't have to be called this. This is just the standard. And also request and response. You can call them anything you want. It's just the order which is important in which you call them. But yeah, so request and response. And the request just means what's coming in when the request is made. And the response is how you want to send back. Or what you want to send back, I should say. So what we want to do here is at the moment we just want to use the res to send something back to the person when they make a get request to the base route. So we can just say res.send hello world. So I'm going to go over now to another service called Postman. So Postman is a free desktop application that allows you to make API requests and test your backend services without having to create a whole website to connect to them. It's a fantastic way of testing your backends, and not having to write loads of front-end code and everything. So go ahead now and install Postman to your machine. It's free to use. And when you've got it installed, you can go ahead and make a new request. And once you've made a new request, yours might look a little bit different because I've got some collections here, but you'll have something that looks like this, okay? And you can see here I've got these options. I've got get, post, put, patch, delete, head, and options. And obviously, as I said earlier, our route is listening on a get request. So it means we have to call a get route here. And the get route, we know that our server is living on port 3000, so we can just say here, http / localhost, because it's on our local machine, 3000 / and here if I save that, whoops, shit, I don't need to save it, and I go back to my server now. Well, at the moment, if I click send, it won't actually work. The reason it won't work is because we have to actually start running our server and making it listen. So right now, if I just go ahead and click send, you're going to see it says could not send request. That's because our server is listening, or it's ready to listen, but it's not actually running yet. So in order to run it, I can just type in that command npm start, which is in turn going to run nodemon index.js. And here you can see it says server is running on port 3000, which is what is console.logged when the port runs for the first time. So let's go ahead now and just go back to Postman and click send. And you can see that we get hello world coming back to us, meaning that our server is successfully listening and we're ready to continue to the next video. See you in the next one, guys. Support the channel by going to buymeacoffee.com/AlfieDoesDev, and I'll see you in the next one. So when working within Express, there are a couple of different architectures that we can use to structure our application. The one we're going to be using today is a very simple system. Essentially, we're going to be splitting our code into different sections. We're going to have one folder which is going to be for controllers, and I'll explain what that is in a second. We're going to have one folder for routes, which I'll also explain in a second, although we did touch on it earlier. And I'm also going to have one folder for the models, which again I'll touch on in a second. So let's go ahead and create the controllers folder now. And inside of the controllers folder, essentially a controller just refers to a collection of functions that can be used, but we want to store those functions in a different file away from the routes so as to separate them and keep our code a little bit cleaner. The routes I'll go ahead now and create as well. And again, this is going to contain our routes, which are the things we're going to be calling. So at the moment inside here, we created just a simple get route, which was going to return hello world. But if we've got lots and lots of different routes inside of our application, we don't want to write all hundreds of them here, for example. We want to split them out into different folders so as to maintain code readability and cleanliness. And finally, we need to create a models folder, which is going to contain a model for the database. That doesn't make much sense at the moment, and I totally understand that, but we'll come back to that when it's time in a moment. So heading back over to this controllers folder now, which I was talking about just a moment ago. The controllers folder will contain all of the functions that connect to the database and actually do the operations that we want to perform. And the routes will import those controllers to their respective files and call them when those routes are hit. So let's go ahead over to the controllers now and do this. So inside the controllers, I've only got one thing we're going to be interacting with, really, one like focus of the project, and that is the projects that we're going to be like keeping track of and maintaining and whatnot for our for inspirational purposes. And inside of it here, we can put all of our functions that relate to interacting with those projects. So obviously, with the first one we're going to want to do is have a function for getting all the projects. So we want to return all of the projects inside of the database. Now I understand we haven't connected to the database just yet, but bear with me, we will do that. So we want to export this function as well so that it can be accessed inside of the route folder, which we'll make soon. And in order to do that, we can just say exports.getAllProjects is equal to an asynchronous function. And just like before, it's going to get access to request and response. Okay. Then we can just say here, we'll move this comment and we'll just put it inside for the moment, and then later on we'll actually write the code for that. Then we might want to get an individual project. So in order to get an individual project, we can just say exports.getProjectDetails, and it's going to be basically the same thing, and we can just return inside of it here get project details. And I forgot to add the equals sign here to make it an arrow function. And then here we can do an add project. And this is obviously going to be to add a project to our database. We can just say add one project here. And we'll write the logic for this later when we import Mongoose, as mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, that package. But for the moment, we just want to set our architecture up, so to speak. Obviously, the next one is going to be to update a project, and that's going to be just request and response as always, and we can just update one project here. And then finally, the last one is going to be to delete a project, which is just going to say delete one project here, okay? So now we've got all of these functions, and they can be accessed from other files now because they're being exported from this one here. So let's go over now to the routes section, and we'll make those routes that I was talking about earlier. So going over to routes, we can make a new file called projects.js as well. And inside of this here, if we just type in const express equals require express and we import the express library, much like we did inside of index.js, we then have access to something called a router inside of Express. And this is essentially how we get those endpoints. So it's very similar to what we did earlier with the app.get thing and everything. We're just going to do the very similar thing here. So now I can say here import from, and then import it from, what was it, controllers / projects. And inside of these curly braces here, I can get all of the functions that exist inside of projects.js, which are going to be get all projects, get project details, add project, update project, and delete project. And then here underneath, I can write out the corresponding routes for them. And before I even start doing that, I just want to export the router by saying module.exports equals router. And then here I can say router.get, for example, on the / we want to get all of the projects. So now when we hit the base route, well, not exactly the base route, I'll explain in a second, but the base route for this one here will return all of the projects. But then I can do something really cool and do the same route here and put a colon before the word that comes after the /, which in this case is ID. And I can actually get the project details, a specific project, by making what is called a dynamic URL, which means after this / here, I can expect a number or an ID, for example, for the project, and then I can extract the project ID from the URL or the route inside of my function in a moment. I'll explain that when it comes to it. Then I can do a post route because I want to update something or send something in. In this case, I want to add a project. So as I'm going to be adding something to the database, I make the route a post route. And then I want to update something, but I don't necessarily want to create a new one. I just want to replace or like update something. And in order to do that, I can use what is called a put request. And that's going to be an update, and it's going to have the same ID syntax that we saw in the get request up here as well. So when I go to / update / an ID after it, I'm going to use a put request for that because I'm not creating something new inside of the database. I'm just updating something inside of the database. And then finally, if I want to delete it, well, no surprises. You can just say router.delete and then get the ID as well from the URL. So you can see here, all of these at the moment, these are all perfectly valid routes, but they aren't going to be used yet. That is because we have to go over to our index.js now and actually initialize these routes to be used. And we can do that by going up to the top here and importing in by saying const project routes equals require. And we can go over to the routes and we can say project. So we're importing these routes into the index.js now because, again, remember, this is the main point of our application, the entry point. And everything has to go through here if it wants to be used, so to speak. And speaking of the word use, in order to use these routes that I made inside of the controller, inside of the route section here, I can just say app.use / projects project routes. So now whenever I go to localhost 3000 / projects / whatever one of these routes here contains, I'll be able to access these routes here, but I don't have to write them all inside of index.js. I can keep them separated and just import them like this, and it makes the code a lot cleaner to read and everything. While we're on the topic of this app.use, actually, another thing I want to use in the app is called app.use express.json, and this is because we're going to be sending in stuff to our Express application via Postman, like we mentioned earlier in the post requests, and the data that's going to be sent in is in the format of JSON, and we have to say to our Express application, make sure that you're able to read this JSON data. And in order to do that, we can just say app.use express.json, and that just means we'll be able to read the requests properly and all of the data that we send in from the Postman. So now I think it's high time that we start actually interacting with MongoDB, and the way we're going to be doing that is via MongoDB Atlas. So hopefully if you've been following since the beginning of this video, you should have created a MongoDB account or already have one already set up and everything. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to continue the tutorial assuming that you have a MongoDB Atlas account. Okay, so right now I'm signed into my MongoDB account. Your UI might look a little bit different, but fundamentally it's all of the same thing. The first thing we have to do before we can even start worrying about connecting to a database is to create a project inside of which we can create a database. And in order to do that on my screen, I can go over to the top left up here, click on the drop down, scroll down and click on new project. As long as you navigate to new project one way or another, you should be okay. So we have to give a name to our project, of course. I'm going to call this one just, we'll call it Express App Tutorial. And then after I've given my project a name, I can click Next. I'll make myself as the only member, the project owner, and I'll click Create Project. We can start, well, actually it's already created now, so it's fine. So now we can start to create a database, okay? But before we can create a database, we have to pick a place and a region, rather, where that database is going to live, so to speak. So you can see here we have to create a deployment. So we have to choose a cloud provider. We can choose between Google and AWS, and I believe Azure, potentially. And we have to choose a region, and in my case I'm going to choose the European region, and we have to choose some specification as well. So let's click Create and see what comes up. Brilliant. So obviously you've got options here to pay, and you can pay like 8 cents an hour, 10 cents every million reads and stuff. But I'm just going to go with the free option, which is going to be more than enough for this tutorial. I'm going to keep the provider the same as just AWS. The only thing I'm going to do is change the region to be the one closest to me, which is going to be Ireland, I believe. So, and obviously for you can choose your region that's closest to you as well. Just keep the cluster name the same. You don't have to worry about what this is, and you can just click Create now, and that's going to create your database. Brilliant. So now you can see here on the screen, you're going to get given a username and password, which I'm just currently blocking out for the moment. You just need to copy your password before you continue using the copy button, and then click Create User. Then you can scroll down and you can have your current IP address is already added, so that's fine. And you can just click Finish and Close. So this is just going to be how you access the database, basically. Hopefully it was clear, even though I blocked the data out and everything. But now, to actually start connecting to the database, you can just go over to this Connect button here. Click on Drivers, and then you can see here we've got this connection string. So copy this connection string, go back into your Visual Studio Code now, go inside of your env file, and just call this URI, okay? It doesn't have to be called URI, I'm just calling it URI. You can call it MongoDB or whatever. But we need this string in order to connect to the database. It's going to consist of your username, and then inside of this password section here, you can delete where it says password and delete the arrows that are on either side, and paste in the password that you copied earlier when you were creating your account, and close the env file. We don't need to touch the env file anymore. That's all good. So now we can actually start connecting to the database. The way we connect to the database is by going to our index.js file first of all, clicking on typing in const mongoose equals require mongoose. So remember, we're importing that package into the index.js just like we did with the Express app earlier. And mongoose makes it really easy to connect. We just have to type in mongoose.connect, and then we pass in the string which we want to use to connect, which in our case is inside of process.env URI. Just like earlier with the port thing when I mentioned the process for getting into the env file, this is it here. So you type in process.env.uri, and then after that you can do an object which you pass in some options. You don't need to worry about what this does. Just pass in use new URL parser true and use unified topology true. And in order to just make sure this is connected successfully, we can do a then block, because this is obviously an asynchronous function. And inside of the then block, we can just say console.log connected to MongoDB. We can catch the error and console.log the error if there is one. But now for all intents and purposes, if I save this and open up the terminal and type in npm start again. Okay, I have an error, but it's not because of the Mongoose thing. It's because of the syntax I've used inside of the projects file here. So this is fantastic. We can just fix it now. So basically, I've used the import here, which isn't the syntax I can use due to the configuration of my project at the moment. I need to use the const and require syntax. So I can just say const equals require, and then put in that string in between the require block here. Save it. And now you can see we've fixed it and we're connected to MongoDB and everything, which is really cool. So now we need to actually start making projects now. And the way we do that is by going into our models folder over here, and we're going to create a new model. And a model is basically a template for a piece of data that we want to be storing. And the piece of data we want to be storing is the project. So we have to think about, what does a project look like? What does it have? What are its properties? Well, the projects we're going to be making are going to need a title, a tag, and a description. And when I say model, I want you to think of another word which is called schema. So think of a schema. A schema is like a plan. Now you plan something. It has properties. It's got details. You scheme something. So let's require Mongoose first of all into this, because we're going to be using the Mongoose package in order to create a schema. And then we can say const project schema equals new mongoose dot schema. So we're creating a template for our project now, and we need to think about what does our project require. So what properties does it have? Well, it has a title, and what format is the title going to be in? I think it's going to be a string, is safe to say. And is it necessary to have a title? I would say it is. So we can pass in required true for this one here. Well, what's the other thing we need? We need a tag as well. Oh, whoops! I need to do it like this. Tag. And let's think. Okay, well, what type is it? It's a string. Is it required? Yes, it is. And finally, the last thing, we can do the same thing for description now. And we can pass it in. So we're saying here we're going to be having inside of our project database a bunch of projects that are going to have this format here. Okay, and obviously I need to be able to access this schema inside from other files, so I can export it now by just saying module.exports equals mongoose.module project and project schema. Sorry. So that's going to export this project now, and we can use this when we want to find projects inside of the database, because we'll know the structure that all of them have when we are searching for them. So going back over to the controllers file now, where we've got all of the projects and everything, let's import the project schema so that we can use it and actually start making things from Postman and whatnot. So we need to import it, and we can do that by saying const project equals require dot forward slash models dot forward slash project, and it's going to be a lowercase one. Cool. And then we can say down here for the get all projects, for example, well, we need to import mongoose actually as well. So const mongoose equals require mongoose. Okay, let's think we want to get all the projects. So we can just get all of the projects. We can just say a try block. And we can say const projects equals await, because this is an asynchronous function, project.find. Well, this is just going to get all of the projects, and it's going to give them back to me and store them in a variable called projects, because we're saying to the project template, okay, look for ones that have got this template here and just find all of them. Okay, well, what do we want to do when we found all of them? Send them back in a JSON format with projects. So the user, when they request it. So let's say now catch the error first of all, and we'll just send back an error saying something went wrong. And now, and actually realize we don't need to import Mongoose. And then we can just go back now to Postman. So let's open up Postman again. And let's try to get all of the projects now. Okay, so it should return to us an empty array. So we know that instead of index.js, we have the / projects, and then we've got that connects to some routes. And this one's just a /. So if we just go to / projects, that's going to be the base route now, and it's a GET request. If I click send, we're going to get back an empty array because there are no projects that exist inside of the database. So that's totally, that's understandable. So now let's try to post a project. And we can do that by going to the add project one here. And we can say const, actually put this in a try catch block. And let's say const title, tag, and description is equal to rec.body. So inside of the request body, when we send one in, I'll show you how to do it in a second, don't worry. We want to send in some information. And when we send in that information, we want to extract it from its container, which is the request body, and get the names, which are title, tag, and description. So let's pull these out of the request body now, and we can say if one of them doesn't exist, we can return an error message to the user saying, please fill out all of the fields. Otherwise, we can create a new project using this model that we made earlier, and we can say const project equals new project, and we can give it a title, tag, and description, because if we open up the model folder, it's expecting a title, tag, and description, and voila, that's what we've sent in from the postman. So as always, we can catch the error, first of all, and send the error back if there is one. But this isn't going to work just yet. We're creating the project, yes, but we need to save the project to the database as well. And the way we can do that is just by saying const new project equals await project.save, and that's going to actually save it in the database. So I need to make this an asynchronous function as well in order to use the await keyword here. But now we are looking good. So let's Alt-Shift-F to format the code, and let's try and post one in. So going over now to the routes, we need to go to post/add. So let's go to /projects/add and change this from a get request to a post request. And now going back to that body part, let's click on body over here, go to raw, and change this from text to JSON. And inside of this is the request body that we're sending in that contains the title. And JSON requires that the key value pairs be wrapped in quotation marks. So let's give this title one here saying this is a test project. Let's give it a tag of this, let's just say fun. And then let's give another one saying description. This is the description. So now if you post this, it's actually going to work, I think, but let's see if there's an error. So no error, but the problem is I'm not actually sending anything back from the server after the request is made. But I'm going to go ahead and check the database now, and we'll fix that after. So let's open up Mongo again, and now go over to where it says database. Click on Browse Collections. And you can see here we've got inside of a collection here called test. And the reason this test is coming here is because we haven't specified a database name. But, you know, don't worry about that. We can do that another time. And inside of it, we have a projects collection now that consists of saying, this is a test project with a tag of fun, and this is the description. So obviously we need to make sure, because the request is still sending because we haven't sent anything back after the request has been successfully made. So if we go over to the project.js controller now and just click on, after new project, just say res.status.201 new project and just send it back. Cancel this request, open this up actually full screen, send another one saying this is a test project 2, send it, and then it comes back to us and it gives us the ID and whatnot of the project, which is really cool. So now we've added a project. Let's try to get a specific project, which is, you know, that's easy enough. But this is going to be a little bit different because if we go over to the routes now that we made earlier, the project.js routes is a get request is expecting an ID. So we need to access this ID, and the way we can do that is by saying const, and we're going to do that technique I showed you about earlier, ID equals rec.params. Okay, and you could also do const ID equals rec.params.id like this, and we can get it out. So we can say const, and let's actually make this an asynchronous function as well. And let's say try. So const project, so we'll find the project first of all, and we'll say await project.find by ID. So very, you know, syntactically sound methods here. Find by ID. What ID do we want to find by? Well, the ID that comes from the request.params.id. And we can say if there is no project, first of all, return saying project is not found. Otherwise, we can send back saying the project and return it back to the user. We can catch the error, and we can send back the error like so. Okay, and actually I should return this as well, really. So let's go now, and we've got that ID that we made earlier. So here, when we created it, it sent this back to us. And the endpoint on which this exists is going to be a GET request with an ID after the base route. So let's change this to a GET request now, and pass here the ID, and click send. And we get back the project information based on searching for it by its ID, which is really cool. So now let's go ahead and do the update function, which is a little bit different, a little bit more difficult, I will say. So let's go and go down to the update project here now, and let's pull out some information from the parameters again by doing const id equals rec.params_id. So first thing you have to do is obviously make our try block here, and inside of our try block we can just say const project. We need to find the current project first of all, and say equals await project.findById. And so just like we did before, try to locate the project. If there is no project, we need to obviously account for that situation. We can just say, if there's no project, just return res.send project not found, and close off the interaction with the database. Otherwise, if the project does exist, we can just say, we can do const title, tag, and description equals request body, which is fine. Then after that, we can say project.title equals title or project.title. Now the reason we have to do it like this is because if the title doesn't exist from what the user sends in, we don't want to override the data, so we just give it the existing title that it already has basically. We can do the same thing for the other parts, tag and description. And then after that, we can just say await project.save and then send back the updated project. We can catch the error after the try block, which is here. And also send back an error message if there is one, of course. But now let's try to update it. So we can go to the routes again and we can check it. And it's a put request this time, followed by update and an ID. So we've already got an ID here, so let's just place update after it. And let's also change this to be a put request. And let's just change it. This is a test project updated now. And we'll click in send. And you can see it returns to us, this is a test project updated. If I delete the tag and description, and I change this again to be hello world, and send it in, it sends back with the new title, but it doesn't override the old data with the tag and the description and everything, which is brilliant. So now the last thing to do is just to delete the project, which is going to be nice and easy. The way we delete the project is just by going back over to our code over here and to just say delete project. It's super simple thanks to the methods that Mongoose provides us with. And we can just say const id equals rec.params_id and just pull that out of the parameters, and we can just say here try block. So we need to locate the project first of all, and we can say const project equals project.findById again. And actually I think there's an easy way of doing this. We can just say await and then put this into an asynchronous function, change this to be project deletion, and we can say find by ID and delete, yes, and pass in the ID. Okay. Of course, there might be an error. We can just catch the error and we can send back error message here. And for this one, we can send, so if there's no like project found or whatever, we can just message back saying the project was not found. Otherwise, we can just say res.send project is deleted. So now let's try to delete a project, and we just need to go to /delete/ID. So let's change this from update to delete and change this to be a delete request and click send. And it sends back saying project deleted. So we're looking for one that's got hello world. If I go back over to the database and refresh it, you can see that has been deleted here. So just think that these things here, which is inside of the database, are called collections. And inside of your collections, you have a bunch of documents, and each document has a template that you provide to it, which is also called a schema that we made earlier inside of the models and everything over here. Okay, so that's really the very bare basics of MongoDB, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do support the channel by going to Alfie Does Dev. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments section below. If you have any constructive criticism as well, please do let me know. I really want to improve the quality of the videos. If not, I'll see you all in the next one. Have a great day, and the source code is down in the comment section below. Bye bye everyone. See you all later.